Hello, everybody, and welcome to the first installment of They Came From Below, a guide to playing Genestealer cults in Arks of Omen. I am Tom, the very lowest of men. I am a representative of 6++ Gaming, and I am very excited to be here tonight to impose some GSC wisdom on you all. It's been a struggle playing GSC through the sort of mid stages of 9th edition, but things are looking up, things are looking good, and it's a very exciting time to be playing the army as we head into the run-in towards probably the end of 9th edition. Structure is going to be as follows. I'm going to talk a little bit about several things that mean GSC and Genestealer cults are in a really nice position competitively at this moment in time. I'm going to explain why the Arks of Omen Detachment is brilliant for Genestealer cults. I'm going to think about our powerful secondaries as of the latest sort of match play pack. Then I'm going to unpack very briefly some of the build archetypes that you see out in the world doing the rounds right now, and think a little bit about how GSC and the meta interact at this moment in time. The intention here is for this to be very introductory, and then I'm going to go in depth on all of these things in subsequent episodes as I unpack how to get the most out of the faction. So do keep coming back. The Arks of Omen Detachment. Now, this, for Genestealer cults, is simply amazing. The first thing is that you can run all the troops you could possibly want, right? I think it used to be that in running battalions and patrols, we were limited down to about sort of 6 units of troops in a battalion, and possibly 8 if you took an extra patrol. That's gone now. With the Arks of Omen Detachment, you can run about 9 troops units, which gives you enormous flexibility to run lots and lots of acolytes, lots and lots of neophytes, squeeze in those little utility units, and get the absolute sort of maximum use out of the detachment. I think GSC have some of the best troops in the game in terms of their utility and their potential use for different tasks, and this detachment really lets you lean into that hard. It's also got flexibility for teching into elites or fast attack. GSC lists sometimes want to go in a sort of elite direction if you're building into pure strains and aberrants, but also a lot of the successful GSC lists like to run bikes, Atalan Jackals, and sometimes Ridge Runners as well. Now you have flexibility to build in those directions if you want. You can take lots of elites, you can take lots of fast attacks. There is essentially space in the Arks of Omen Detachment for any sort of pre-existing GSC build you might think of. Any Genestealer cults army you might want to dream up should fit into here. You've got all the slots for fitting in your rock grinders, vehicles, characters, whatever you like. Being able to fit our characters in is extremely important, and by having 4 HQ slots, you've got all the HQs covered if you do want to run them. You also have the ability to take extra characters for each elite slot you take, which doubles up very nicely with our sort of ability to bring in extra characters. And so that leaves you in a really good position. You're not going to struggle to fit in the support characters that you want to bring. So that Sanctus, that Kelemorph, that Nexus should be just fine to come along for the ride. I think the biggest change and the most significant thing for Genestealer cults in Arks of Omen is the emergence of powerful secondaries. We already had a very good secondary in Broodswarm, Horde Mode Activate, as I like to call it, which essentially rewards you for flooding the board with as many bodies as you possibly can. I'll talk a little bit more about getting the most out of this in future episodes, but suffice to say, Broodswarm is a secondary that if you build for, you can score enormous amounts of points on, which tends to help counteract any sort of kill secondaries your opponent might take, like no prisoners. So Broodswarm continues to be brilliant and hasn't changed. The biggest glow up went to Ambush. Now, Ambush was already a good secondary that rewarded you for killing things in the Genestealer cult way, by coming out from underground, by killing things when they're exposed, by killing things with crossfire tokens on. And it now rewards you even more generously. Specifically, when you kill something with a crossfire token in Ambush, you can get 2 points per battle round for doing so. This leaves you in an extremely powerful position where just killing 1 or 2 units in the right ways every turn is generating you 4 victory points for the battle, which is massive, absolutely massive. You can play a very passive defensive game and still rack up your points. Finally, GSC are still really good at action secondaries. Retrieve battlefield data, raise banners, and our own sabotage critical location, which now rewards you much more generously and actually isn't a complete write-off in some matchups, means that you will always be able to get through the game by using actions. You've got lots of spare characters for banners. You've got little 5-man acolyte packs for doing things like RBD. You're always very well equipped to score well on action-based secondaries. This combination of things means that Genestealer cults are now looking like an army that can score high and score around the opponent really, really effectively, and it's on them to stop us. The next thing to think about is build archetypes. And the good news is that almost any build archetype you can think of has now benefited in some way from some generous points changes and sort of re-implementation within the game in the update to points and balance. The most common and most effective competitive build, so top tier competitive build, is very much the Industrial Affinity Custom Cult build. And you will have seen this being run by players like Innes Wilson. Eric Lathyrus was the sort of original pioneer of this. And you've got a bunch of players, myself included, who've been sort of doing well with this kind of build in recent times. And it's still very good in Arks of Omens. This means running lots of neophytes with sort of heavy weapons, lots of Atalan Jackal bikers, and supporting characters to keep those things regenerating, keep them in the game, and gradually choke up the opponent and the board. All of these units have benefited. Some of the characters got points drops. Neophytes now get free special weapons, so flamers, grenade launchers, webbers. These are amazing things to have. And the icon on a neophyte squad now costs 10 points, not 20. Which means I think it's very much a take now, and your neophyte packs all around the board are going to be able to regenerate models if they aren't destroyed. Absolutely massive, and it means you're not just dependent on clustering around the icon ward. Atalan Jackal bikers have benefited because although they cost a touch more now, they get their Atalan Jackal power weapons built in for free. These are industrial weapons, which means there's all sorts of combinations for them with the stratagems in the GSC book. And it means that your Atalan Jackals will have a little melee punch to go with their ranged output and their resilience. Another build archetype that continues to be a strong option is the Synaptic Resonance Custom Cult build. This very much builds on the Neophyte Biker character framework, but it adds psychic support by taking the Synaptic Resonance custom trait amongst the other cluster of traits that you might want to take. And I'm going to unpack those in more detail in a subsequent episode. You'd run a Magus and a Patriarch in this build to give you psychic output, make you dangerous in another phase, and to open up the possibility of psychic secondaries as well. I think the change to ambush means that this build isn't as necessary as it was. Likewise, the change to psychic interrogation means it's not quite as easy to rack up points on psychic secondaries as it was either, but it's still a very useful build, and depending on how the meta emerges, it definitely has its uses and its place. Plus, if you want to run a Patriarch, I think it's the most fun way to run one. Finally, melee GSC. Now, I'm not going to lie to you guys. I think at the moment, melee GSC remains the least sort of top tier competitive way to run the faction, which is a massive shame, and myself and other players would agree that's not the way we want it. We definitely want to live in a world where melee GSC is the one. But there is lots of things you can do that will mean you're still competitive and able to win games in the competitive world with Genestealer cults. Might not be the most optimal, but it's definitely powerful, and it did get a few benefits. So for this, you'd want to be running Twisted Helix for boosted strength, movement, and durability, and a wounding on 6's power. Or you could run Impassioned and Industrial Affinity to have +1 to hit on the charge with ignoring modifiers on your industrial weapons. Not impossible, you could run a Pauper Prince's build as well, and it's worth shouting out Malik Armin Rubio, who runs an excellent Pauper Prince's build, but only he ever seems to quite know how to make that work, and I'm not going to claim to be an expert on that. I think it involves using the sort of 5-up invuln or a relic to boost the melee support there as well. Now, in a melee build, you want to run lots of pure strain Genestealers, using They Came From Below for pre-game move, using trucks to launch across the board from. You want to take melee acolytes, buffed up to the 9s, maybe with charge delivery. And I think there is a genuine place for aberrants. Now, in terms of the combat units, aberrants went down. They're now 27 points each. And in my own playtesting, I find they are heavy hitters. They can absolutely put a dent in large targets. They can hold ground for you, and they're surprisingly durable, especially if you run them with a Biophagus to hand out 5 out of Feel No Pains and just really build it into that resilience. This is an extremely fun way to play GSC. I'm not going to lie, it's probably my favorite. And if I weren't trying to sort of place a little bit higher and sort of leaning towards the sort of more dirty shooting builds, this is definitely where my heart would be. So I highly recommend trying melee GSC and maybe exploring all of these different builds. In future, I'll be unpacking them in more depth, explaining what makes them tick and how you as a player can get the best out of them. So finally, what I want to think about is where Genestealer cults sit in the Arks of Omen meta. Now, it's very possible there are several armies out there at the moment which are going to ultimately prove to have raw power that's difficult for GSC to deal with, but in the overall spread of armies, I think Genestealer cults place very nicely. We are extremely resilient against Alpha Strike builds, right? If we go second, our opponent isn't able to see where we are. With movement of blips and other shenanigans, we're often able to no-sell any efforts to get into us early doors, and we can often retaliate extremely hard to any sort of overexposure they might make. So that means that some of the Alpha Strike builds you're going to see aren't going to want to come into GSC, and we're going to be able to play through the later stages of the game by weathering that early storm. We still have two fundamental things going for us that the meta is going to struggle with. We can deliver heavy shooting damage, and it can be very difficult for the opponent to respond. Bringing in seismic cannons 24 inches out, no Auspex scan or block is going to stop that. In a world in which Armor of Contempt is gone, massed or seismic cannon shooting at AP2 damage 2 is really good. Goes through Marines like they're not even there. Extremely useful to have. And in the Jackals and other kinds of units, or the high AP of Pure Strains, heavy damage of Aberrants, we've got lots of ways to really put the hurt on, lots of ways to make sure we decide when the fighting happens and how. GSC Horde builds can be really hard for the opponent to chew through. So if you're teching into Mini Transhuman, as one of the custom cults does, or Twisted Helix does, it really, really does take a long time for the enemy to chew through our units, and that's very much to our advantage. Because we're a bit of a Horde skew in a meta that I think has a lot of more elite armies like Space Marines, Eldar, Votan, all sorts of other things that are lower body count and are generally looking to punch each other in a more elite fashion. Throwing a Horde in the mix gives us a real advantage, and there aren't that many genuine Horde lists out there to take us on. That said, I think we do still have vulnerabilities, and that is in general to volume and pressure of different kinds. So wherever we're going into high rate of fire, lots and lots of volume shooting, that might be Imperial Guard, it might be Space Marines with all of their gladiator tanks, it might be Craftword Eldar with lots and lots of shots. That's always a very real risk to our fragile bodies. Likewise, pressure melee armies is a very real concern. The big one for me is Orcs. I think forward pressure Orcs throwing lots and lots of bodies into our faces can be really hard for GSC to deal with and can overwhelm us before we can get a footprint on the board. So it's those kinds of armies where I think we'll have to see how things sit. It's going to be really exciting playing over the next few weeks to see. But I'm generally very optimistic that GSC are in a very good spot and are going to be competitive in lots of games and lots of matchups in the Arks of Omen era. In short, it's time to get them on the table and have a go. Thank you very much for listening. This has been a very fun introductory episode to do. I'm going to go through in future looking at some of our best units, thinking about these builds I've talked about in more detail and how you can run them, thinking about how to maximize the secondary game, and thinking about how some of our Arks of Omen matchups play out. If you're interested, you can find me on 6++ Gaming's YouTube, where there's a whole load of other content. We put stuff out all the time, and we're aiming to put out even more than ever before. And you can also find me in the 6++ Discord if you want to talk GSC lists. Have a great time out there. It's been a plan generations in the making, and it's time to put it into action.